Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We are going to be covering the art of delegation, and we've got some amazing guests with us today to kind of really draw insight from and learn from. My name's Andy. I have a career of working in startups. I joined a startup called Dropless straight out of university as my first job, and as we grew, I kind of accidentally found myself managing 70 people without any training. And so basically, it turns out that zeal alone is not quite enough to make you a good manager, and obviously was very ill-equipped. So after slogging through various books and learning through a hell of a lot of practical mistakes, practical learning we call that, managed to kind of build up some understanding of delegation, how important it is to kind of scaling your team and your business, but really have so much more to learn, and wanted to put together this webinar to kind of draw on the experiences and insights of three amazing people who I know in my network who are very good at this and have lots of experience themselves. So yeah, hopefully everyone's kind of joined by now and we can make a start. Today's conversation, we're going to be covering obviously the importance of delegation, the common traps, mental barriers. We're going to be looking at what clear communication looks like and how you build trust, safety and support in your teams. And we'll dive into these topics with our panel of experts who've joined us on our call today, and they together bring a real wealth of experience and insight. So really excited to learn from the guys. A quick introduction then. So first of all, we've got Millie. Millie's the smoothest operator in town. She is the founder of Pay As You Go COO. She works with countless founders, business leaders and owners on everything from strategy and product market fit through to much more tactical kind of projects, such as, set up inventory management, and everything in between, really. Millie, could you give us a bit more of a background and introduction to yourself?
Yes. Is it too late to change the name of my business to Smooth Operator from Pay As You Go COO? As much as I enjoy that rhyme, I think being the Smooth Operator is great.
Rebrand on its way.
Yeah, there you go. So yes, as Andy says, I'm a fractional COO and business coach. So I help early stage founders essentially just get more shit done in their growing companies. So I've been a COO since 2018, but I've got about 20 years of experience in cross-functional project management. I spent 3 years at Amazon in business development for 2 of the categories and leading a global first cross-channel strategic consultancy project, which was a huge learning experience. I have an MBA from Imperial. I'm also an expert in residence there, so I work with academic spin-outs to help really innovative products figure out commercialization. I'm really excited to get stuck into the webinar.
Wicked. That is insane. So yeah, I'm very lucky to have you on board, and excited to hear your kind of feedback on some of the topics we're going to discuss. Next, we've got Paul Mather. Paul, you served in the military and then obviously was part of Deliveroo during their scaling days. You obviously now work in startups as a mentor and coach, which I think is going to give you a really unique blend of experiences that we can learn from. So much knowledge in that noggin of yours, Paul. Really keen to unlock it with you today. Can you give us a bit more of an intro and background to yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. So I've been delegating for about 15 years now. I started out in the British Army. I was a platoon commander in Afghanistan, and then I was a chief of staff back in the UK. I did that for about 5 years. And then I joined Deliveroo as employee number 15, the second ops guy, and helped to build that business out, scaling about 500 times in 5 years. So that was a crazy growth trajectory. And over the course of that time in various roles, I had to learn to delegate very, very well and teach other people to delegate also. And for the past 5 years, I've been somewhat nomadic. I've been based in Antigua, but traveling around quite a lot, spending quite a lot of time in places like Portugal, for example. And I work, as you said, with founders and with mid to senior level operators on challenges of operations and leadership, including delegation. That's one of my key topics. So I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in, sharing my insights and learning from the other panelists.
Yeah, wicked. I mean, talk about growth pains, 500 times in as many years. That's just crazy. So I'm sure you've got lots of personal experience to draw on from that. Lastly, we've got Leah. Leah, I know you've obviously been an executive assistant for many years now, and you've obviously had lots of first-hand experience during that time to learn what the best delegators do to unlock their teams and drive results. you're now moving from delegatee to delegator, and I know you're enrolled in the COO course with Operations Nations. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself as well, Leah?
Yeah, so thanks, Andy. As you said, I have about eight years experience in facilitative roles, from finance assistant all the way up to executive assistant. I worked alongside anyone from department managers all the way up to CEOs, and I'm really hoping that I can share some valuable insights into what good and bad delegation looks like from a slightly different point of view, so from a delegatee's point of view, and how I'm now using that all the information that I've learned, and kind of how I'm implementing that into my role as I move into more of a delegator myself.
Amazing. So throughout the talk, guys, there's a little function. If you look at the bottom right, there's there's a activities icon, which you guys can click on and submit. Use the Q&A function to submit any questions you have. I'm going to do my best to pick up questions as we go. But we also have some time at the end where we'll go back through any other questions that we missed during obviously conversation. So yeah, please use that function to submit any questions you have that you can think of as we go through topics. I think everyone here on the call has some inherent understanding of how important delegation is. Otherwise, you wouldn't have carved out time in your busy schedule to be here. But it'd be great to hear from each of our experts a little bit why you guys think it's so important. Millie, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with really early stage founders, so I'll give my answer in the context of working in an earlier stage company. When you're in the very early stages, a lot of your work is founder led, or it's led by the limited number of co-founders that you have, and so there's a limited talent pool available there, and you're not going to be great at everything. Like, you cannot be an expert at everything that you do, and you're going to suck at a lot of the things that you're trying to achieve, and that's okay. That's just a part of reality. You don't have to be amazing at everything. And learning how to delegate in the earlier stages of your business, it just allows you to open up and access such a variety of different skill sets that you'd never be able to have otherwise. And I think, if you actually want to be able to get things done, giving over some of your responsibility to other people and unlocking those different talent pools is going to allow you to complete projects that you'd never have been able to complete otherwise, or to complete those projects in just a much more efficient way.
So key to scaling your team. If you want to become more than an individual contributor, which you have to, if you're building a team or a business, then yeah, it's so important. Leah, why is delegation important to you?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. So employee development, I think maybe it's a side that people kind of forget about a bit, but delegation provides team members with opportunities to develop skills and take on new challenges, which lets your team members demonstrate skills that you might not have known that they've had, and kind of really let them show where they can progress and hopefully move into kind of higher roles and things like that.
Cool. Do you have anything to add to that in terms of importance of delegation, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to drive home the importance of delegation is to think of how badly it can go wrong. So I've come across some horror stories. I know a founder who works in B2B SaaS, and he had delegated the closing and then the execution of a deal to a very senior salesperson in his team, who closed the deal successfully, but then because the task hadn't been delegated very clearly in its entirety, failed to onboard the client properly, which actually led to them losing a multi-million-dollar deal. It was one of those things where it kind of fell between the cracks. The salesperson thought that his role ended at the point the deal was closed.
Yeah.
And failed to follow up and left the client wondering what the hell's going on. And that deal was lost. So it can directly translate into losing revenue, which can, for a startup, be an existential crisis.
Yeah. Okay. God, that sounds like a real worst case scenario. You've really terrified the entire audience and myself about delegating anything. So yeah, no, I'm like, it's good to I think the best learnings are in the stories of people's learned experiences, and hopefully we can pick up those today from you guys, and help people avoid those moving forward. I don't know if anyone else has any other horror stories, because that's what I enjoy hearing, the horror stories of delegation going wrong. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like, if delegation is so important, then that kind of begs the question of why do people so often struggle to do it or do it well? Like, what are the common traps that you guys see tripping people up? Leah, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so I suppose in the role that I'm currently sitting, I've noticed a lot that leaders tend to find it's a lack of time to delegate. They can't find the time to delegate. So leaders find it quicker and easier to just do things themselves without kind of looking at the long-term benefits of delegation and how it actually outweighs the initial time investment involved. And I think that usually catches people out quite a bit.
Yeah, okay. That's something I've definitely told myself. I don't have the time to delegate. So I really resonate with that. Like, it's such a common thing that I've heard as well. People that I've managed who are struggling to delegate their own tasks, their own team, also say, like Millie, Paul, I know you guys, I'm sure have had lots of exposure to this same challenge. How do people overcome this? How do you overcome that I don't have enough time to delegate kind of like reason that you give yourself?
I think that phrase, "I don't have enough time," for me is such a cop-out phrase, because you make time for the things that are important. If what else have you had time for in that week if you haven't had time to delegate? What are the other things that you've been doing, and how much have they, in perspective to delegation, how much have they improved your capacity to get the things done that you need to do? I think, if you can have a long, hard look at how you're spending your time as a leader or as a founder, if you don't have time for delegation, you're effectively saying that you don't have time to grow your business. And as a founder, your most important thing you can be doing is growing your business. You don't have time to do the most important thing you should be doing. I'd say that would be my approach to it. What have you had time for? Have you had time to get to the bottom of your inbox? Have you had time to spend a lot of time in Slack? Am I just drawing from my own experiences there? A little bit. But you've got to make time for the things that are important. It's the first time that you need to get something done by somebody else. Sure, it's obviously quicker for you to just do it yourself, but are you going to keep doing that for the next 20 years? What's the cumulative impact of that time versus how long it would have taken you to just properly explain something to someone?
So it comes down to like that prioritization, understanding the importance of it and making it a top line focus for you to do really well. If it's just a task, delegation is just like on the to-do list, you're probably not going to necessarily prioritize it as high as you need it to. If you kind of associate delegation with, I think a good way of associating it is, as you touched on, is growth. If you associate it with growing your team and growing your business and doing it well, then that is what's going to bump that as a top priority in your list, and that's what's going to cause you to make time to do it, and carve out time and maybe deprioritize other things that can be wasted on. Paul, do you have anything to add on that front in terms of that time sort of excuse or reason for not delegating?
Yeah, I think to echo Millie's points, it's very important as a first step to recognize that effective delegation can make the difference between your business being a success or your business being a failure. It is literally that serious. If you think about it in terms of time, as an early stage founder, you're already working very hard, right? I mean, they say a typical working person works 40 hours a week, but for an early stage founder, you're talking, minimum 60 hours a week, probably more than that. Now, as your business scales, if you try and scale that business by just working harder and harder, spending more and more time on it, there's a limit, right? I mean, you can work 80-hour weeks, you can probably work 100-hour weeks, but 120, 140, 160, like how far are you going to push it before you burn out? The only way for you to scale your business is to delegate, to find appropriate people to delegate work to and allow them to get on with it without constantly micromanaging, so that you can focus on the things that you're really good at that really move the needle strategically. There's no magic bullet to be able to do that really, really well. You just need to start small. Start with something that isn't absolutely critical. Doesn't matter if it goes wrong, and work up from there. And you will find that the benefits are exponential. As you start to delegate and build trust with people and build capability in your team, you'll be able to delegate more and more, take away more and more work from yourself. And that's how you will scale your business successfully.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think like Sorry, go for it, Millie. Go on.
Sorry, I didn't know if I should use the raise hand function or just physically hands. It just ended up being awkward. If I can add to Paul's point, which I think is such a great point of taking on too many things. I think if you look at it from a mathematical perspective, a human can't run at full speed 8 hours for a day. You could work 100 hours a week, but there's diminishing returns for each of those additional hours because you're not working at capacity. From a basic mathematical perspective, if you can work at max capacity, say 4 hours a day, and you bring on someone else who can take on those other 4 hours of work that you'd be doing, that's 2 people running at full speed for 8 hours rather than 1 person running at half speed for 8 hours. It's just maths.
Yeah. And I think the point you raised that is just starting small, like, and then you start to get the exponential kind of factor, because once you start delegating that small thing to someone, that's time you have back to focus on delegating the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And then from there, you'd suddenly have a very clear plate that of work that you were doing 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago that you're now not doing, that someone else is picking up for you. So I think that's a really tactical tip for people struggling to get over that first hurdle of making time for it. It's just starting really small, start with something really basic that's relatively quick and easy to do. I mean, things that I've done is with delegation is delegating things that I can do just with someone. It doesn't take that much extra time to do the task with them with them observing me, and then flip that on its head and then let them do it and me observe them. That's the time I would have invested in doing it in the first place. So I think that's starting small is really, really useful tip. In terms of any other kind of common traps, then, is there anything else that can trip up people going through this process of delegating? Paul, I've seen you mention before a little bit about emotional barriers. What do you know about that in terms of being a common trip up?
Yeah, so this comes up really often in the work that I do with founders and senior operators. So some common emotional blockers might look like if I don't do it myself and I delegate it to someone, they might not do it as well as me. They might fail. So there's risk attached to it. Some founders might think that if they don't do it themselves, it might look like they're not working hard enough, and people will question how serious they are about the business. Some founders and people in general feel that if they've started something, then it's their baby and they need to be directly in charge, directly in control, and see it through to the end. So those are some common ones that come up all the time.
Yeah. And like, what's the tips for overcoming those emotional? A lot of those emotional barriers you've just described are very reasonable kind of fears, effectively, right? Like in terms of the fear of failing to delegate properly, someone not doing it as well as you'd like them to. You got control over something a team that you've built or a business that you've built. You have a lot of kind of ownership over that. So what are the kind of tactical techniques to overcoming those that you've seen like founders and leaders deploy effectively?
Yeah, you're right. They're very rational fears. They're grounded in logic. So it's only natural you're going to feel them when you start out. I think the way to overcome it is, as I said, start small, enable your team to do things well enough so that you can be comfortable that they'll get it done, and focus on the things that you're really, really good at, because there will only be so many things, so many functions, so many areas of the business that you are the absolute best person to be working on. So you focus more time and energy on those and delegate other things to other people who can do them better. And as you delegate things and you see the work come back and it's not an absolute failure, might need some work, might need some development, but you'll get there in time. You'll start to develop more comfort and be able to delegate increasingly meaningful tasks. And I think reframing your position as a leader to think of yourself as someone who is there to make decisions and to support a team, not to just do things hands-on all the time. I think that's an important transition you have to make from individual contributor to leader, from operator to founder. You're in a leadership position. You're there to think and decide and support, not to just work. And then finally, I think another way of thinking about it, which really works for some founders who are people and are very conscientious about how their team feels, if you don't delegate work to your team, meaningful work, they'll become disengaged. You know, if you do all of the really interesting, meaty core business work and just delegate admin tasks to the team, they're not going to want to stay. You know, you need to give them things which push their boundaries and allow them to develop as operators. Otherwise, they're going to become disenchanted and want to go and work somewhere else where they are trusted to do meaningful work. So that's another way of flipping it, which might encourage you to delegate.
Yeah, okay. Because I think like it really resonates on the point about I've seen a lot, and this applies to myself really, where if you want to start like an early stage company, you have a bunch of doers, right? People who are very good at executing, and then the business grows, and then obviously the company tries to promote their growth, and so they look to put them into management roles, and suddenly there's this blocker of like, can they move from executor to manager? And I think it's not a lack of necessarily ability, but it's that some of those fears that you touched on of like not being seen to be doing enough. It's a very different way of measuring your own success as an individual, from I'm measuring my success by executing and delivering on these tasks to I'm measuring my success by, you know, managing this team really, really well and the team delivering on team goals. And I think I've been the victim of that, but also seen the victim of other founders and early stage businesses where those kind of early promotions are really common. But I imagine the same in terms of even a more corporate environment. If you are the difference between you potentially going from someone who's an individual contributor working in a team to being that manager role is being able to make that transition relatively smoothly. Leah, I'm conscious we haven't heard from you in terms of what you think the common delegation traps are, and whether you have any points to add on that front.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with what you and Paul are saying around like the fear of letting go and the fear of losing control. I've seen a lot of leaders fear that, like Paul said, delegated tasks won't be complete to their standards. But I also see that a lot of leaders, especially people that are moving up in their careers quite quickly, as you've said, they're afraid of losing visibility over things. And I think that's like an interesting point. And they're not wanting to let go of day-to-day tasks, like the tasks of like being constantly involved in things out of fear of losing visibility. Maybe it's not the trust of someone being able to do it, but it's their fear of not being able to see what's going on, especially for co-founders in startups. But I think if you're giving your team the right tools they need and you're delegating properly and effectively, that then you're able to have the trust in your team to be able to communicate all of these things back to you properly. That means you don't need to be constantly in the doing and there to have this visibility. That if you're delegating properly and you have the tools in place, that you can still have all the visibility that you need to have. And it allows you to kind of have that mindset shift, like moving away from the doing and the execute into the more of a strategic leader and making those important decisions by having the visibility that the team are able to give you.
Is there, as someone who's been delegated to a lot through their career, is there something that you've done as someone working on someone who's being delegated tasks? Is there something that you've done to try and mitigate some of that fear with the people, with the leaders that you're working underneath? I'm keen to understand like what you've maybe identified is really like has a real result in terms of breaking down that fear that a leader might have.
Yeah, so I suppose one of the biggest things is building trust with the people that I sit under. So I suppose for me, it's from a slightly different point of view of managing upwards. I'll take a lot of time to learn about my manager or the person that I'm kind of supporting. So how do they work? What matters to them? How do they like to see things? Do they like to see things visually? Do I use something like Asana to show them progress on things? How do they like to be communicated with? Is it through Slack, email, face-to-face? Really kind of like taking these things and making sure that you when you're communicating and when you're kind of working with them, that you consider all these things, because everyone works completely differently. So especially in the position that I'm in now, I work with 3 different people and they all work completely differently. So taking these things and really taking the time to understand a manager and how they work is important. But I think it also goes the other way. As managers, I think it's important to understand the people that you're delegating to. I suppose also on that, really just like taking initiative. Like I tend to kind of try and take very small things on, maybe without being asked, kind of just taking the initiative of being like, look, this is a very small task that I've been able to complete by myself. Like maybe we can start looking at giving more things to me. If someone's struggling to kind of like let go of things, like Paul and Millie and yourself have said, start small. And sometimes if they can't start small, you start small. And that really demonstrates like a reliability and starts building that trust from the other side. So I suppose, yeah, that's the kind of way I've gone about it in the past when I'm working with a manager or someone that I'm kind of managing upwards to.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that I've seen been really effective is people who put together like almost like personal preference documents. I mean, we're going to come a little bit later to kind of documentation and how important that is, but there's also like documentation you can do for yourself as a person. And like some of it, obviously, you often just communicate verbally in a conversation like this with someone in your team. I like this. I like to communicate via Slack. I like to get notification of this kind of issue very quickly. You know, this is what I deem urgent. But by writing down in a document, you articulate a lot of these things to yourself that you might not have thought if you just addressed it in a verbal conversation. So I think that's a really good tip that you've highlighted there that I think individuals can take away as someone managing. You can actually create a document for yourself in terms of your kind of what your preferences are, and I think that will really help you articulate a lot of things that you might not have done before, and that's then something that you can share with individuals who join your team. And I think you should encourage people who, as you said, two ways, right? Like should encourage people joining your team to do something similar. So yeah, I think that's like a really good point. And then on the taking initiative on that front, you mentioned about taking the initiative. That's something that you do that because you want to get involved in more engaging stuff. And I think that comes back to Paul's point. If you're delegating, start small, but then do delegate more juicier tasks that are going to be more engaging, that push people a bit more, because that's the stuff that people want to get more involved in. I think if you delegate purely the administrative tasks, you're going to really struggle to retain really good people, because the good people want to be, want to get their teeth sunk into kind of juicier projects and responsibilities. Cool. Aside from like the points that you guys have raised, one of the things that I've also always given myself as a really like excuse for not delegating is budgets. Being able to afford the right people in the right positions has always been like a massive, in a kind of a cash constrained kind of driving towards profitability VC funded startup. That was always a big blocker for us in terms of actually being able to afford salaries for people in positions to do responsibilities, whether it be an assistant, customer support, bookkeeping, marketing manager, whatever. Hiring someone in the UK is really intimidating when you think about what like an average salary for an entry level role might be 30k. It's costing you 35k as an employer. That's 3k a month. That's quite scary and super costly and risky, and genuinely a lot, like very prohibitive for a lot of hires you'd like to make. But and that can often be used as an excuse, to Paul's point, as a mental barrier, is like an excuse that you can kind of use to kind of procrastinate on doing it. And this is going to be a shameless self plug here, but it's something I'm very passionate about, is you can hire talent overseas at a fraction of the cost of what you might hire in the UK. And like that really had a eureka moment for me at my last company when we started hiring overseas. It's like, oh, right, we can really afford more people in the team to do a lot more and really accelerate results. And those things that I couldn't delegate before because we didn't necessarily have the skill set or the manpower capacity in the team, we could now afford that. And that became something that we really leaned on. And so, whatever the range of role is that you might be considering, give it some thought. If you're not hiring overseas already and you're telling yourself this is, I can't hire the people I want in the UK, then I would seriously consider this is an option. And if you want a friendly chat, you can reach out to me after the webinar. We can maybe speak about how we might be able to help you. It's what we do every day at Hot Sauce. So that was a shameless self plug over. Moving on. So we've talked about some of the common pitfalls that trip people up before they even get started, but how does someone best prepare for success when it comes to delegation? What tactical, practical tips do you guys have? Paul, maybe we can start with you.
Okay, so if you think about it in terms of that old adage, where there's a will, there's a way. I've seen plenty of founders who are willing to delegate, they just don't necessarily know how. I've also seen the reverse, where they understand really what's required of the delegation, they just have some emotional resistance to doing it. But in terms of the process, for me, that needs to be based on a strong foundation of three things: documentation, training, and culture. So that's the starting point. Once you have those things in place in order to enable delegation, then you can choose to do it or not. And then there's a potential emotional resistance to overcome if you still don't want to delegate meaty tasks at that point.
What does good look like for you in terms of that good foundation of training, documentation, and culture?
Okay, so documentation, all important and common processes should be documented. So if there's anything that's fundamental to your business, for instance, onboarding a client, then there should be a documented process for that. And I'm very often told by startup people, oh, well, we're fast moving, things change all the time, there's no point in documenting the process. It really doesn't take very long. You pull up a Google Doc and you write down, these are the 9 steps to onboarding a client of our business. Right? And yeah, maybe tomorrow that process changes. You have to introduce a new compliance form and incorporate that in your onboarding process. You just open up the Google Doc and you add step 10. It's very, very simple. It really doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't need to be a project. You don't need to have a big discussion about it. Just sit down and write it out in a kind of pithy way to begin with, and you can build on that and add links over time. And that should be something that's used day to day as a sort of quick start guide, not just a hefty manual that's sitting on a shelf somewhere gathering dust. It should be something we can actually use.
Living document.
That's the first thing. The second thing is everyone is trained to do their core role. So if we stick with that example of onboarding, anyone who joins the business who is required to onboard people should be given that document and trained how to follow those steps in the way that you want them to, so that you're not just doing it on the fly, and then every time they get, they go from step 1 to step 2, they have to come and bug you and ask you loads of questions. Well, I've done step 1. How do I do step 2 now? That should be written down, and they should be trained to do it before they ever actually have to do it. It just makes things way easier. It will save so much of your time if you show them the first time, give them a handrail, and then help when required, not jumping constantly. And then finally, when I talk about culture, it's everyone in the company knowing that they're empowered in their role to take the actions which achieve their goals, the mission, the company mission, and ultimately the company vision. So their goals would be, short-term tangible things, OKRs, KPIs, whatever kind of system you're using in your company, something that's measurable. Mission is what they need to achieve, or what the company needs to achieve in the next quarter, let's say. And the vision is, changing the face of whatever industry in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
All of those things need to be aligned, and everyone needs to understand them, understand their part in the process, and feel empowered to take action on that basis without having to constantly ask, can I do this? Can I do that? People shouldn't have to constantly ask for permission. They should know the direction of travel and be able to take action in that direction.
I've got so many questions for you. So I think one of the revelations that I had was sometimes you manage to get hold of really cool documentation from bigger companies. Recently got hold of a bit of a document from that kind of outlines how Stripe does their hiring. And you look at these documentations that you see online, materials that you see online, you think, wow, that's so sophisticated. How does anyone build that? But the reality that I suddenly realized, and was a game changer for me, is that document started as just a list of 7 bullet points. Someone literally did that for the first time. As they were doing it, decided to just list out 7 basic bullet points. And then from there, that document becomes, as you said, a living document, hopefully. And everyone contributes to it in an ideal world. And it grows, and then it gets a bit messy, and then you format it a bit better, and then it grows more, and then you format it more. And so starting somewhere with that documentation, even if it's just a list of bullet points, is so useful. And it's useful when I do the task and I write down that documentation, right? And I'm planning to delegate that somewhere in the future. But even for me doing that task again, it removes any uncertainty for me doing that task again, because I've got that clear thing that I can come back to, and saving templates and messages and links to all that information makes it very much faster for me to do personally myself, let alone to onboard and train someone new. My questions that I had for you, Paul, on this were like, I love documentation. That's probably because I'm an oddball, but like, how the hell do you get a whole organization to, that's something I've struggled with in terms of when I've been part of a team and growing a team and I've been trying to push documentation. Sometimes it feels like pulling teeth to get certain individuals and teams to do documentation. It seems to be some people are happy to do it, some people really struggle. How do you manage to get an organization and a team as a whole to create good documentation for their processes?
So I think the key to it is don't overdo it or overthink it. Start now, start simple, start with the core processes, document them succinctly in a dynamic, easy to update format like Google Docs, for example. Update as required, expand on that as you scale. Think of it, as I said, of a bunch of like one-page quick start guides, not the technical manual. You know, when you buy a product, so you buy like a GoPro or something like that, you know, you get like a 1,000-page booklet that tells you everything you can possibly do with it, and then you get like a one-page guide, like this is how you take your first video. You're aiming for that quick start guide. And actually, Imran Chagpar just dropped a really interesting comment in the Q&A. He said, I found that taking a video of a process you want to delegate and using an app like CapCut, so our captions, works quite well. And that's a brilliant suggestion. There's loads of similar suggestions I can think of. You could make a Loom video. You know, if you don't want to write something down in document form, just talk to a Loom and then get it to give you an AI summary and turn those bullet points into the doc. Or even, you know, if you don't feel you have time to do it before you onboard the new starter, get the new starter on a call, talk them through it, and have Fireflies or some integration like that take AI notes again. And so talk them through it and then just send them the AI summary after the call, and get them to come back to you and confirm that they've understood it and it makes sense and it reflects what you spoke about on the call. It doesn't have to be a really time-consuming exercise of sitting down and creating some enormous manual. Just start really simple in bullet point form and go from there.
The other thing, I think the points, thank you, Imran, for that comment. I think it's a really good point about recording videos using a Loom or another software. And what you've just said there about even just having that transcript and summarize your points is like, and again, to the second point of like, you can do it with them on the first day, let them observe you, and then you take notes from that. I mean, like we talked earlier about that time being such a common block for people to delegate and delegate more. Is like, I don't have time to do it. When you break it down like that, you can literally sit with someone, do an activity with them, take the notes from that activity of them like observing you, and then from there, you know, move forward with you creating better documentation and then them taking over from you. So it really kind of makes that that challenge a lot more surmountable. The other point you raised, Paul, which I really wanted to dig in with you, was everyone having understanding and visibility over the direction, the mission, vision, and kind of goals of the organization. How do you make sure everyone has transparency and visibility over those?
I think too many companies set their vision and their mission in a really conceptual way. You know, it's just a senior leadership team, for example, in a closed room talking through this stuff on a kind of almost theoretical level, where it's very like brand focused. You know, we are going to change the face of engineering software, and that's where it ends. You know, it's like incredibly broad, it's incredibly lofty and long term. If you give that as a vision to you know, Andy on day one, who's just joined the company, what's he going to do with that? You need to translate that into a tangible mission that people can work towards on a set time frame, and then measurable goals, right? So that Andy can come in and know his part in achieving that grand vision today and how he's going to be measured, which might be, you know, the number of calls he makes to potential customers, for example. So all of that needs to be aligned. And too often I see companies where they have a really lofty long-term vision. Maybe they have measurable goals, but they have kind of nothing in the middle to tie it together.
Yeah. Okay. So bringing it all together for everyone, so it's there's some tangible, something tangible there for everyone at every level of the organization. Amelia, you smooth operator. You've loads of experience. Well, obviously helping founders at startups. I presume developing specifically a lot of training and documentation. I'm super keen to hear your thoughts on what good documentation and training looks like and how people can achieve that within an organization.
Yeah, I think it's quantitative. I think it's along the lines of what Paul was saying. You know, I speak to a lot of founders who say the team aren't achieving what I need them to achieve, and 9 times out of 10, it's unfortunately because that hasn't been communicated in a way that other people can understand. I think about it from a very basic philosophical concept, the idea of qualia. Qualia are the building blocks of our knowledge. And if you imagine a child, and a child is looking up at the sky and they're seeing a color, and they say, what color is that? And someone says, blue, the sky is blue. Even if they're actually seeing a slightly different color, because you can never truly communicate what you're actually seeing, you're using the same word. So the same word can mean 2 different things to 2 different people, but they're using the same word. So you think you're speaking the same language when you explain something, but you're actually speaking about 2 very different things. And so for me, good documentation is quantitative documentation. So if you actually want to get something done, what does quantitatively good look like? I work with a lot of companies that will have a mission statement that we want to be the best. Sure, what does that mean? Do you want to be the best because you want to generate the most revenue? Okay, well, how much revenue is that? How much is the second person generating? So you need, what, £1 more than that to be the best in revenue generation? What does it actually mean when you want something to be done? So I think there are 3 key things when you're communicating expectations to get something done by somebody who isn't yourself. Like, who is actually owning it? So if you're, trying to delegate something in a group full of people, if I was to say to the 3 of you, I need XYZ to happen, I think to myself, right, I've delegated that. I've told them that I need that to happen. I haven't said specifically who's going to own that thing, who is the actual accountable person for getting that done. 2, I would say, when do I need that done? Soon. What does soon mean? Is soon tomorrow? Is soon in an hour? Is soon in a month? You're saying the same word, but you're having 2 very different interpretations of it. Set an actual deadline for something. And then, what's the definition of success? What does good look like? And I use really simple frameworks because with everything in an early stage business, we put too much complexity into things. Like you were saying, you don't need a 15-page document when sometimes 7 bullet points will work for communicating what you need in the moment. So I use a really simple framework for communicating the most important goals in an organization, the biggest objectives, is just, we need to take figure A, this thing, say it's revenue, from X value to Y value by Z date, so that everyone can see, this is the thing that we're talking about, this is where it is today, this is where it needs to go, and this is when it needs to get there. You've communicated actually what you're looking for in that. And, even if it's not your biggest objectives, even if it's, can you put this document together? Can you write this email? What does a good email look like to you? You have to get it out of your head and clarify to other people what that looks like, or you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah. One of my experiences has been, though, with that I've really struggled with this. So, you talk a lot about setting clear goals, being very clear about what good looks like and how you're going to measure that with people. But how do you do that in early stage businesses where you are hiring someone for a new role that you've just created and you don't know what good looks like because you're developing a marketing strategy from scratch, or you're creating a new process?
Sorry, that's my Siri just speaking at me.
or if you're creating a process that is going to evolve consistently over the next 12 months, how on earth do you get objective and how do you get into the metrics of what good likes for situations like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing with disruptive companies. If you're doing something that's happened before, you're not being disruptive. So it's part of the nature of building a disruptive business is that you're doing a lot of stuff for the first time and you have no idea what good looks like. But you have an idea of the direction that you want to be going in. And so, you could say it's a marketing goal. So say you're trying to grow your followers on LinkedIn. you don't know what you can actually achieve because you haven't tried to do it yet, but you have an idea of what good is. So maybe you've looked at someone else's profile and you've seen that person's got 10k followers, like that, they seem like they're doing well. That looks like a good direction to be going in. So let's try and aim for that number. And if we don't hit it, did we do all the things that we wanted to do to try and hit it? We didn't actually hit the number because of all sorts of different contexts around us, but we did all the steps that we said we would do. You have some kind of idea of something. Like if you go to a shop, say you're walking across the shop and you see a jumper in the window and you think, I want to buy that jumper. You go into that shop and you see the price of the jumper and you think either that's a really good deal or that was too expensive, or that's about how much I wanted to pay for it. You didn't know walking past that window that the jumper was, you think it should be £30, but you have a gut feeling that something is not good, appropriate, or bigger. And if you can start to put some definition to that by looking at signals around you, to put some quantitatives on things, I think you can start to set some frameworks for it. But you can also have a discussion. Like if you're delegating to someone in an early stage business, so say for example, I work with a marketing freelancer called Caroline. She helps me with my marketing. She's an expert. Why don't I just ask her what good looks like? I don't have to know all the answers. I don't have to be good at everything. So you can kind of come with a balance between my gut feel for if something felt too much or too little. What is the expert actually telling me?
And in the context where your gut feeling telling you that something's wrong with that performance, but you're not the expert, how do you handle that?
So if you're saying, so say someone does something for me and they haven't delivered what I wanted them to.
So we talked about the very earlier on, Millie, about like, it's okay not to be good at everything that you delegate, right? That's the benefit of delegation, right? Is that you're able to tap into other people's expertise who have much more knowledge than you. You've also talked there about having that gut feel for something's right or wrong. When you've delegated a specific task to an expert who should know more than you in a field, but your gut feeling is telling you that it's not quite right, how do you handle those situations?
I think it depends what not quite right looks like. Did it not hit the outcome that you wanted it to, or did they not do the steps that you wanted them to hit the outcome that you thought you would? I think there's two sides of it. If you didn't hit the outcome that you thought you were going to, then that's a question where I would say, right, well, what else was around that? What were we able to control in that situation? And what was like additional macroeconomic competitive context? If it's, I'm asking you to do these 4 inputs and you haven't done those things, I think that's a very different conversation to, we're in an early stage business, we're trying to hit these goals, we think it's going to be a bit like that, we didn't hit that, but we did all the stuff that we said we were going to do to get to that. If that stuff isn't getting done, then that's another conversation of, okay, well, did I clarify exactly what I wanted those steps to be? If I did and you didn't do them, then that's not necessarily a difficulty in my communication, that's a difficulty in you just not doing what was asked of you.
Okay. And we've got some really good questions from people who I want to go through. Take some time to go through with obviously you guys on the call. But I just wanted to touch, before we do that, I just wanted to touch on a kind of a final topic, which is around kind of creating environments of trust, safety, support. We've talked very much about creating great process and delivering great training from that process, and how you document that and deliver great training. Also talked a bit about setting really specific goals that are quantifiable and objective and agreed upon by all parties, and making sure that's what you're kind of measuring performance against. In terms of like, let's say we've in the situation where we've hired someone, we've created our document, we've documented our process, we've delivered training, we've set up really clear goals and for them to deliver on, and we know what success looks like, and it's very objective and quantified. How do we what do I do now to support and manage that person for success? Like Leah, we haven't heard from you in a while. It would be really good to hear what your view is in terms of how we create that, how best to manage and support someone once they've started.
So I suppose once you've started doing this, it's building the trust, isn't it? We've kind of touched on this, and delegation requires trust in team members' abilities and providing support as and when needed. I think, as kind of Millie, you've said, you hire experts for a reason. Some people are better than you at some things, and that's okay. That's why you've hired them. So really putting the trust in in your team members' abilities and providing them with the kind of platform to do things. I think also kind of on that as well, there's a balance between giving autonomy over something and being available for guidance. And I think it's really important to kind of create a safe environment where employees feel comfortable seeking help. So whether they might still be the expert in the field, but you still creating that kind of trust and safe environment where people can come and seek help if it's needed. I think also around that is, like, I think we've touched on it already, is you're bound to fail. There's bound to be times when things go wrong, and it happens. It's part of it, and you learn from these things. But I think looking at it from the other side of looking for help and things like this should be celebrated, not punished. I don't think that someone reaching out for help on something, or kind of standing up and being vulnerable and saying, like, I don't know everything and I do need your support on this, should be celebrated rather than punished, and really making people feel comfortable and opening up things to kind of support them in that way then helps mitigate things possibly going wrong. So yeah, I think really creating that environment and making people feel safe and comfortable seeking advice or help on things.
What have people done? What have your leaders and managers that you work with done to create that environment? What actions have they done? What like tactical things and techniques have they used to create that environment of like sort of trust and safety?
I suppose it's the way they communicate with you and the way that you kind of like manage situations, especially when you're being delegated to. It's the way that they kind of communicate with you, give feedback, and reaching out. Maybe it's set out when something's kind of first handed off to you that we'll catch up every week on this, or we'll catch up bi-weekly on this, and checking in, being like, is everything okay? Are there any blockers? Is there anything that I can support with? Rather than sitting there over your shoulder, micromanaging, like constantly being there, that kind of like building that trust. And when you feel like someone's trusting you to do something, but you have that space to sit there and be like, is there anything that I can do? Or is there anything that I can do better? And creates that kind of environment where you feel like you can ask for it.
I think one of the things that I've tried to do to be less of an arsehole, because I know I can be, is in my one-to-ones, I actually have a template, an agenda that was written out that we follow it. I try and do a weekly one-to-one. Really, is kind of maybe for something more senior, it might be every 2 weeks, but maybe someone more junior might be twice a week. But somewhere in that sort of cadence, a weekly one-to-one where you actually have as a talking point yourself asking that person in your team, is there anything I can be doing to make your life better, to make your kind of enjoyment at work go up? Asking those questions, having those listed out every week, because I will neglect those questions if I don't have that in a template in front of me for that meeting, and have those listed as part of the agenda to discuss. So I think, yeah, as you said, asking those questions. But if you're bad at asking those questions, like me, maybe you put those in like the meeting agenda that you have in your one-to-ones with people, and having those on a regular basis as well. Paul, anything to add on the building trust, safety, and support side of things?
Yeah, so something that I like to use as a principle for delegation is delegating responsibility and not accountability. And what I mean by that is, effectively, as Millie and Leah have been saying, you allow people to fail and make the assumption that if there's a failure, then it's your failure as the delegator. The first thing you should do is look in the mirror and ask yourself, how could I have delegated that task better? Because most of the time when I come across scenarios where people are dissatisfied with the output of something that they've delegated, it's because they didn't do a good job of delegating to begin with. The flip side of that is if you delegate something and it goes well, whether it goes, well on a mediocre level or well on an exceptional level, you celebrate the hell out of that person or that team who've delivered the work. So you create this culture where if people do a good job, they're really, really celebrated. And if they do a bad job, you say, okay, let's analyze why that went wrong. Let's avoid it happening in future. My fault. I could have done a better job delegating to you. Because 99% of the time, people have good intentions. People aren't out there to do a bad job. The vast majority of people are very conscientious, especially in the kind of space in which we work, because they're motivated by the mission of the company they work for. So if they've done a bad job at something, you really have to ask yourself why that is. And it's unlikely to be wholly their fault. And it might actually not be their fault at all.
Yeah,
might be your fault.
So sort of reframing it in your own mind in terms of taking accountability for team losses and then celebrating the individuals for team wins. Yeah, okay. I want to get to some of the questions that we've had some really good questions. So someone submitted a question saying, I work in a consultancy and I'm the only operational person in my company. I don't have a direct team to delegate to. So if I need support or resource, I need to lean on other team members of the consulting team, but I often feel guilty or I'm received with pushback when I delegate. Really interesting question. I don't know which of you guys maybe want to tackle this one. Go on, Paul.
So it's hard to give a very specific answer without knowing more, but I would say in general, what you need to do is understand what's in it for those people. Because if they're effectively peers, if they don't directly report to you, you have to find out their motivation. So in what way can they benefit from achieving this task? Is it perhaps going to develop their skills in a particular area, build up experience? Is it something they can add to their CV, something that may get mentioned in their performance appraisal? There's normally some benefit that you can find to that other person. You need to communicate it in those terms. Would you mind supporting me with this project? By the way, I think it's going to really help you when you come up, for potential promotion next year. That kind of thinking. I work a fair amount with chiefs of staff who, unlike COOs, don't tend to have direct reports. So they have to get things done by influence, which is a similar position that you're in. So their soft skills, their communication skills have to be on point. And a really good chief of staff is a master of understanding how people may benefit from doing certain things for them.
Leah, you had a raised hand there. Something to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with Paul. I think this is, and it kind of links into my day-to-day role, is usually things get handed off to me to then reach out to other departments to support on. I think I completely agree with your point, Paul, but also not just how they're going to benefit from it, but what's important to people, like what do they care about, and kind of understanding what they care about and then positioning it in that way is like, look, I know that you really care about this, and this is like how we can kind of work together and things like that. And it's not a case of like you sitting over them and telling them what to do. It's I'm working with you to try and achieve a common goal here. And kind of, approaching the situation like that. It's like thinking about what they care about and getting to know them and their position and what they're doing and how you guys are kind of working together on something rather than you're fully just delegating something off to them.
Yeah. So selling it in the right way to those stakeholders. I think that's the carrot, but you also sometimes need a bit of a stick in life. And I think you need to be potentially working with your manager to help influence what those department heads or function heads or whoever the senior people are, to make sure that your goals are somehow integrated into theirs at a top level, so that at a top level as a team, those people that you need another team's support from, they need to see as part of their team's goals that they need to help you to drive the results of what you're looking to deliver on. So I think working with the stakeholders at a senior level, potentially maybe with your boss or manager, to help them influence kind of at that senior level and make sure that teams are all aligned to help you on your goals, and that it's not too siloed. Like there should be an organizational vision, and they should see how their team goals align with yours to contribute to that, and therefore they should come back to selling it to something that selling it in a way that they're incentivized to do it is kind of potentially getting that worked into kind of the company's visions and mission. Cool. And then another question. I'm a software engineer and need to delegate tasks to junior engineers, but I struggle with estimating how much of my time supporting them may take up. How do you forecast as the time investment when you start delegating to others and they need your support? It's a great question. It's a great question. I don't want to pin this all on you, Millie, to go first, but I feel like given what you've done a lot of project-based work, so I feel like this might be more in your wheelhouse. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I would say always overestimate. We are, as humans, are fantastically bad at underestimating how long something will take and overestimating how much time we have to get that thing done. I think if you've ever gotten up early for a flight and then still rushed to leave the door, you know exactly what I mean when I say that. I think it's very, it always takes longer than you think. I think one thing that we do when we get more senior in organizations is very quickly forget what it was like to be more junior in an organization. We forget what it was like to learn something. You forget what it was like to not know how to do something. You forget how long it took you to learn. Can you go back and remind yourself how long it took you to learn that thing, and what kind of things came up for you when you were thinking about that? You know, how can you make this situation better for the people that are coming after you? So I would say try and rack your brains to go back in time and think about how long it took you to do that, and then add maybe 20-30% of time on top of that, because you know, people will always take more, things will always take more time than you need, but you can also on top of that set yourself up for success by just being as clear as possible when you're sharing everything. You know, if it's taking a long time, and I'm not no shade throwing here, if it's taking you a long time because you haven't communicated properly what someone needs to be doing, what can you do to make better documentation, or to, you know, send better resources for someone to use to be able to be as efficient as possible?
Yeah, overestimate for sure. Overestimate, because it's always easier to overestimate and cut down on that time and realize you have more time in your hands than do it the other way around. And the second thing I would say is try and agree it with them. Like, have a conversation. I know if someone's starting, having a chance to, but like, even if someone hasn't started yet, you can still chat to someone who's due to join your team and actually go through some of this with them and discuss it and try and agree reasonable timelines. And if something flags like, well, that sounds like they're taking a bit too long to do this, have a conversation about it. Like, why is it going to take? Why do you think it's going to take this long to do it? Because then you're aligned. You've cut out all the guesswork. You're both agreeing. It might go wrong from there, but you can agree with them to be conservative. Like, look, you think it's going to take you 6 hours. I think maybe we book it in for 8, and then we've got some extra time around that. You know, if someone's new and they're joining, they're going to need time to, you know, research the context of what's going on with the activity. So always overestimate and discuss it with them. I think is the most straightforward thing to do. We are running out of time, but I think one more question, because there's a couple that are around this, which is when things go wrong when you're delegating, when the results or the balls are being dropped, and the quality is not quite there. How can you improve the quality? How can you get things back on the right on track without becoming a micromanager? How do you course correct? Go on, Paul.
I think I'd go back to what I said earlier about looking in the mirror. I think I would really analyze very carefully how you delegated the task. You know, did you set clear parameters? You know, the way I would go about it is, here's what I need you to achieve. Here are the parameters. What do you need from me? What kind of support do you need from me to achieve this task? How often do you want me to check in with you? Or how often are you going to report to me the progress of the task? Did you actually do all of that before you delegated? If you did, and there's still an issue with quality, then maybe there's a more serious problem. You know, maybe there is a quality issue in the team. Maybe you need more experience, more senior resource, different kinds of resource. Maybe people are in the wrong roles. You know, there's a variety of different things that could be going wrong, but I would always start by looking at your own role in the situation. How could you be a better delegator? How generally could you be a better manager? Because there's almost always room for improvement.
To build on that point, I'd be interested to hear your feedback on this, Paul, but like, self-awareness, self-reflection is really important. If it's not clear to both of you that they've performed badly, that's potentially an indicator that you didn't delegate correctly in the first place. Because if you, to what Millie's point earlier about setting very clear, measurable, quantifiable results and objectives, which, yeah, with results that are like clearly indicate whether you've done really well or done terribly, if you've done that right from the start, it shouldn't even be an awkward conversation, because you should both sit down for your one-to-one and both know that they are well behind target, and it shouldn't be awkward. So yeah, coming back, if you don't find yourself in a situation where it's really clear and obvious that they've failed, then you potentially, to Paul's point, need to go back and self-reflect and maybe revisit some of the points we discussed earlier around clear target setting and agreeing metrics with them that are kind of objective and you know, not, you can't argue them. I know it's difficult. Every situation is different, but that's, yeah, hopefully, I don't know if you agree with that, Paul, but.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. It shouldn't be a surprise if you are checking in with the frequency that's required of the task, and if the task was clearly enough defined. And the other thing I would say is, you know, is possible. I mean, I would say it's likely as a manager or a leader that you should have some support yourself. You know, are you getting enough support from the person you report to? Or if you're right at the top of the food chain, if you are a co-founder, for example, do you need some support from elsewhere? Do you have a mentor? Do you have a coach? Do you have an investor perhaps who's a bit more active, who you can go to and say, look, I'm having this consistent problem with delegation, for example. How do you think I could do a better job? You know, asking someone who has more experience in that domain is very prudent.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for those questions. They were really good, tough ones. And thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Millie, Leah, Paul. You've been absolutely brilliant. Thank you for sharing those insights with us. So many pearls of wisdom. I feel very lucky to have been able to learn from you today. Hopefully everyone else who's joined us and watching this also feels the same way. They feel like I've learned a lot and they're feeling prepared to take delegation to the next level. We'll be sending out the recording of this webinar shortly, maybe probably by tomorrow, to recap anything we've discussed, or if you want to share it with others who think it's relevant for, please do as well. And again, self-plug, if you need any help hiring overseas support, that's really affordable to actually begin delegating to, now that you've kind of taken your skills to the next level, just drop me a message. We can have a quick chat and discuss whether we might be able to find someone wicked, cover loads of different roles, and usually can start from just 7,000 a year. And if you have any freelance COO work, please contact the amazing Millie Barker. She's absolutely insane at what she does. And as well, for any mentoring needs for you, startup, or any colleagues in operations, please reach out to Paul Mather. I've had the fortune of working with both Millie and Paul, and they're both really exceptional. So thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Amazing. Thanks, guys.